So if you don't know me, I'm Siobhan Reardon, President and Director here at the Free Library of Philadelphia. And at the Free Library, we advance literacy, guide learning, and inspire curiosity for all Philadelphians through our many crucial resources and services. So many of our offerings, including this afternoon's program, are made possible only through the support from generous individuals like yourselves. So please consider making a gift that will help the Free Library continue to grow and thrive. So I can't tell you how thrilled I am to introduce today's very special guest to our author event series. Gail Collins has been an integral member of the New York Times editorial board for almost 25 years. Throughout her career, she has been a vocal, embodied proponent of women's rights and contributions to the history of our country. Notably, in 2001, she herself made journalism history when she became the first woman to hold the post of editorial page editor at the Times. Amongst her numerous books are America's Women, 400 Years of Dolls, Drudges, Helpmates and Heroines, and When Everything Changed, The Amazing Journey of American Women from 1960 to the present. Gail Collins takes her dedication to the story of women in the United States to the next level in her newest volume, No Stopping Us Now, The Adventures of Older Women in American History. We are so very grateful to have her with us today to speak about this incisive and revealing work, which NPR has called a robust social history of America's changing attitudes toward women. So please, everybody, join me in welcoming Gail Collins to the Free Library of Philadelphia.
Thank you so much. I am so sorry that I was so late. I apologize. And oh my God, thank you so much for waiting. I was looking forward to this all week, and now here I get to be, finally. Is the sound working out okay? There's always a sound crisis in my life, I swear to you. For somebody who yells so loud, it's weird how often this problem happens. I'm just going to talk a little bit today about the history of older women in America. And you men out there, I always appreciate the chance to say that we really appreciate your support. And this is all about you, too. And then we'll take questions and talk about whatever you want to talk about, which I suspect may not just be about older women in America, but what do I know? What do I know? I got interested in this subject, back when I was doing one of my other history books, and I found this letter from one of the early colonists, and they were all guys back then, and they're writing to England saying, please, oh my God, will you please send us some wives? We really, 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 really want wives. And he sent his requirements, all the men were requiring, their standards for a wife, which were that they be civil and under 50 years of age. That was it. That's all they wanted. And that came back to me a little bit later when I was looking, and somehow I came across, do you remember that old Loving Care ad about how you're not getting older, you're getting better? It was from back in the, yeah. Well, the copy on that ad, which I did not remember at all, begins, in this youth-made world, when a woman's over 25, she's considered old. So I thought, wow, we're going from under 50 is great to over 25 is old. And then right now, of course, you've got, Nancy Pelosi is about to be done 80 and she's running the House. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg is doing push-ups. And as we note right now, they're both very, very popular. So I looked back and was trying to figure out what rules there were about what periods in history older women were regarded in the same way as older men, and in what periods they were just sort of shoved to the corner and dismissed. Well, one thing was obviously the scarcity angle back when, if we can tell from our early columnist, and in the Wild West, if you were 90 years old and you were a woman, I mean, you could do anything. You could run for mayor, you could have a store, you could get married 12 times. Didn't matter. You were really, really, really popular, whatever your age. Then in my final theory about what this really meant, though, because obviously we're not scarce anymore, was that if you look at our history, the times that older women were regarded as older men were respected, were regarded as an important part of the community, were the times when they had an important economic role. And the times when they didn't were the times when they were consigned to a rocking chair, metaphorically, sometimes literally, but those were the differences. And I started out thinking about this with the colonial women. If you were a colonial housewife, you created a lot of wealth for your family. You had vegetable gardens and chickens, and you were making butter, and you were doing all the other stuff that created stuff that your family needed and things that could be sold or traded with other women. They sort of had a parallel economy going on. But one way or another, you were really important for the economic survival of your family. And older women were very popular. Younger women wanted to come and hang out with them and learn how to do all of those things. And my favorite example of this period was a woman named Esther Lewis, who it's really around the early 1800s. Anyway, she's running a farm in Pennsylvania. She's widowed at 42, and so now she's in her 60s, and thank God she's keeping a diary, so we know all this stuff. But in the course of 1 year, she's churning 288 pounds of butter. She's making 1,000 candles. She's educating her 4 daughters. She's sheltering runaway slaves. And she discovered ore on her property and opened a successful iron mine. Meanwhile, her mom moves in with her and begins spinning 33,000 yards of yarn a year. These women were very popular. There was just no question about it whatsoever. But now after the revolution and everyone moved to the cities or started to move to the cities, you had a whole new model of what a wife was supposed to be doing. An urban middle-class wife had no economic role whatsoever. She didn't often even have much of a housekeeping role because there were so many poor immigrant women in most cities that you could get people very, very cheaply to do all the cooking and cleaning and the other stuff. So the only role many of these women had, and the only role they were celebrated for, was for being a mother. Pure and simple, all you could get credit for. And my example of this that if you had told me a few years ago that I would be obsessed with Martha Washington, I would not have believed you. But I'm really into Martha Washington now, and I want to tell you about Martha Washington in this case. Martha gets married young. She has 2 children. Her husband dies. She runs his business very successfully. Then George comes along. She falls in love with George. They get married. They use her money to fix up Mount Vernon, which was really falling apart at that point in time. And then they start entertaining all of George's political and social friends. And if you're a guy like George Washington at that period in America, you have lots of visitors because there weren't really any hotels. So you hoped possibly, if you possibly could, you just dropped in on people and spent the night. Martha was entertaining an average of about 300 visitors a year. Some of them stayed for a month or more. They never went away. And poor Martha is responsible. She's running a major hotel, basically. She's making sure they're all clean. They've all got sheets. They've all got that stuff. And they're all fed every day. They get transport if they want to go anywhere. And at night after dinner, they're entertained because there's absolutely nothing to do but sit in the parlor and talk. And George sneaks off to his study every night. So it's only Martha doing all this work there, and all the friends are mainly his. They're mainly guys. They're probably not the most fascinating individuals in the world, all of them. But Martha entertains them. And one of the senators who came by reported that he had spent the evening talking with Martha and that he had a great time. And he said, "If I live much longer, I believe I shall at last be reconciled to the company of old women." At the time, Martha was 58, and he was 52. So, I mean, geez. And Martha was also, when the war began, she was the Spartan mother. She would encourage the troops. She was at Valley Forge the whole winter. But when people started, but she did not have any children by George, which pretty clearly, if you look at the evidence, was George's thing, not hers. She already had 2 kids. George liked to pretend not, but still. Anyway, there were no children. And when people, Martha, who did all this stuff but had no children by George, when people started celebrating George Washington in a really big way in the new media and magazines and so on, when they wanted to celebrate the woman in his life, they wrote about George Washington's mother. He didn't even like his mother. She was a very difficult woman, but she was the mother, and Martha didn't have the mother role with George, and therefore she just didn't count as far as the people who were running the mass media were concerned. This is also at the point in time after the Revolutionary War, as we get into the 1800s, when doctors for the first time really discover menopause. They had no idea, really. I mean, they just didn't care. They weren't paying any attention. But they finally did discover and start to think about menopause, and they instantly decided it was a very bad thing. This is one post-revolutionary medical textbook. It says that menopause is sufficient to disorder the whole frame and often destroy life itself. So much for that. And after that, as time went on, during that same 1800s period, you would have many doctors theorizing a lot about menopause, that it drove you crazy, particularly if you had sex after menopause, guaranteed to either kill you or drive you insane. There was no other possible way around it. That's the way it was. So when I'm thinking about this, I am the older women being treated well and not being treated well at different periods. I've been trying to kind of look at different periods in American history and which ones worked out well and which ones didn't. The 1920s was a very bad period to be an older woman in America. It was the period of the flapper. The average outfit for a woman went from 19¼ yards of material to 7 yards in 1 decade's time. Entertainment, everyone was celebrating younger women. They discovered the marketers. Advertising was becoming a very big thing for the first time, and it was being directed at younger people. No one saw any point whatsoever talking about older women about anything because they weren't buying anything. This is a theory that continues to this day for reasons I cannot possibly explain to you. But in entertainment, until then in our history, the great people you wanted to see on stage were generally middle-aged, largish women. I mean, you had to be largish because everybody wanted to see you far away. I mean, the more of you there was, the better. And they were mostly middle-aged. People like Lillian Russell, you know, was sort of the famous person, and she was in her middle age when she became a great, great star. And she was really into voluptuous identities. She used to go on to Delmonico's restaurant with Diamond Jim Brady, and they would have eating contests to see who could eat the most. And when they came in, Lillian would put her corset in the hat check room just to make sure she had enough room to do everything that she wanted to do. So that was a great time. But then suddenly the 20s come along, and you've got movies. And movies, you can see every tiny little wrinkle, every tiny little pore. And suddenly, the younger you were, the better. You could not beat, I mean, you know, you look at all the little Mary Pickfords and people popping around like that, pretending to be 12 even when they weren't. The first Miss America was 16 years old. And when she was not preparing for the entertainment, she was shooting marbles with her friends backstage. But she was, you know, the person of the era. I mean, that was a bad time to be older. A good time, example, was World War II. Suddenly, all the guys are gone. They're all off at war. Younger women who had children were very strongly resisting the idea of going to work. They really, really, really wanted to stay home. So suddenly, you know, nobody was more adorable than old women who would come to the workplace. They were celebrating, you know, the Rosie the Riveter things they always talked about. I was looking at a couple of those along the way, and one of them was Josephine the Riveter. Josephine was 80 years old, and it was like, how wonderful, Josephine, you're out there making planes, riveting away. She just can't do enough, and the whole world just couldn't get enough of her. I read another thing in a magazine of the time saying how wonderful it was to be in a restaurant and see charming 60-year-old women carrying trays full of crockery with a little beam in their blue eyes. And I thought, those eyes were not beaming. This is silly. But still, I thought it was a good idea. They celebrated it. Nobody was saying, oh my God, this is terrible. You're going to work at your age. You can't do that. That's exactly what you were all supposed to do. You could not be, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about times that were great, but I just wanted to go back to the 30s for a minute, just because this knocks me out. Don't you remember soap operas, daytime soap operas? My mom used to run them all the time when I was a kid, and they started in the 1930s. And The idea of the soap operas was that who were you going to entertain in the middle of the day? It was housewives. Everybody's at work. They're not going to be carrying these radios around with them. So the daytime programming was all directed toward housewives, toward women in their 30s, 40s, and 50s. And one of the great heroines was Ma Perkins. Ma was a widow, and she ran a lumber yard, and she, in her spare time, hunted down Nazis and stopped train wrecks and just did all this stuff, but she was a great hero. And my all-time favorite was Helen Trent, who, when life mocks her, breaks her hopes, dashes her against the rocks of despair, fights back bravely and successfully to prove that because a woman is 35 or more, romance in life need not be over. That was Helen. She did it. Helen ran for 7,222 episodes. She never married any of her 38 suitors, and she never turned 36. And then we had the war, and women were popular, and then came the post-war era, the boom of the suburbs. Men were coming back. Nobody wanted women of any kind taking jobs because all of the guys needed jobs when they came back. And as people moved into the suburbs, the very, very strong idea was that young couples should have their home in the suburbs and no mothers should be coming around to hang out with them very much, certainly not to live there. It was a time when the whole concept of mothers was just not that popular unless you were a mother of small children. But the mother of the mothers was just completely gone, not cared about at all. And then it got worse. The boomers arrived. I was among them. I'm sorry. I did it. But then suddenly there was just no room for anybody except, it was never trust anybody over 30. Do you remember that period in time? We trusted many people over 30, but still, that was the vision. And then everything changed, and I'm going to tell you 3 reasons why I think that the vision of older women in this country has been transformed. And the first is the Civil Rights Movement and the Civil Rights Act. In 1964, you remember, the Congress prohibited discrimination in employment on the basis of race. As that bill moved through, mainly Southern senators trying to make it not work out, proposed adding gender, which was supposed to be a joke. But my heroines of the time, Margaret Chase Smith and then Martha Griffiths in the House, both looked at that and said, works for us. And they grabbed it and ran with it. So when the Civil Rights Act came into law, it also prohibited discrimination in employment on the basis of gender. Everybody thought that was completely ridiculous. My own newspaper ran an editorial saying, ho, 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 gender, next men will be Playboy bunnies, hairy legs, ho, ho, ho. That's it, that was it. That was all they thought about. It's so humiliating, I can't tell you. But that's the way it was. However, when the first offices, federal offices, opened to take complaints about employment discrimination, the first people in the door were the airline stewardesses. Stewardesses at that time had the one glamorous occupation that women could hope to get. There were like 1,000 applicants for every job. It was the only job where you traveled, you saw stuff. It was supposed to be, it was a wonderful job for the time. People would tell me that when they got a job as a stewardess, they'd be on the front page of their local paper. Girl from our town gets to be a stewardess. It was huge, huge, huge. However, you had to put up with the fact that every day somebody would check your makeup and your hair and your weight and everything else, and you got fired when you turned 30, or if you got married. And the theory behind this, as executives testified before Congress, was that the businessman who was their great customer wanted to be greeted at the door by a beautiful young unmarried woman who would then light his cigarette and pour him a drink. And my old friend Martha Griffiths is listening to this in the House, and she said to the executive, "Sir, are you running a business or a whorehouse here?" And it was the quote heard around the world. So, and that changed everything for the stewardesses. Well, today, obviously anybody can be a stewardess on a plane. You don't have to be a particular age or a particular gender or have a particular haircut. But the second thing that's happening that's going to change everything about the way women of every age participate in the economy and the way they're viewed in the economy is the economy itself. After the war, everything was booming. It was fantastic. Everybody was envisioning a middle-class lifestyle for the first time in American history. Regular people aspired to have a house, to have a place where they could send their children maybe to college, to go on vacations. Things that average Americans had never been able to hope for before were all within grasp, and they came. They got it. It worked out until the 1970s when the bottom fell out of the economy. Remember the oil boycott happened, and just the competition from other countries started kicking in. And suddenly, almost overnight, you could no longer, on average, support that family in that middle-class lifestyle with one income. And that was transformative. And I will never, ever forget, back in the 1980s, I was at New Britain Community College, I think someplace in New Britain, Connecticut anyway, and I somehow wound up talking to this entire class full of guys. Doing women's history tour. I don't know how this happened, but anyway, they were lovely young men, and we were chatting away, and I said, well, what's your idea of a perfect wife? And they weren't going to say beautiful and sexy to me, I mean, really. So they said, a good personality is what we want. And I said, oh, that's good. And then a guy in the back of the room said, and a good earner. And they all said, yeah, a good earner is very, very important. And I thought, wow, the world has changed. Once everybody starts valuing young women on the basis of their earning capacity, they are going to be valuing all women, including older women, on the same basis. And as women get older, they have their careers, they've had their lives, and everything, they've created assets. They've been asset-making members of community, and they're judged and valued the same way that men are. And it just really knocks me dead every time I think about those kids in New Britain. I got to tell you, I just think about it all the time. And the third thing, the one last thing I want to talk about what changed everything for women, were the women themselves who did the fighting about employment opportunities. In the 60s, late 60s and the early 70s, so many places you had women filing lawsuits saying, look, we never get promoted. Look, this pay scale discrimination is terrible. Look, I've never had an opportunity to do this job, that job. Nobody who's a woman does. At my paper, the publisher, I think, posted a notice one day saying, we have 4 great editing jobs. Any guys who are interested, please let me know. And the thing about this story, and what happened at the time, has happened everywhere. They filed suits or threatened people or just embarrassed their management and leadership, and suddenly everybody became very conscious of diversity, and there was a very strong desire on the part of any company of goodwill, certainly including mine, to have a workforce in which women were represented equally. Now, the other part of this story is that the women who did the fighting did not get the benefits because they were A, older, they were B, in jobs probably for 5 or 10 or 15 years that were not promotable particular jobs. They were deputy travel editor or something that, was not something you were supposed to be zooping up from at the time. And they'd gotten in everybody's face. I mean, they made trouble for everybody. They irritated a lot of people. So the rewards never went to them. They went to people like me who were walking in the door at that moment when suddenly all hands on deck, we need a whole bunch of women around there, came forward. And I know so many of these women, and they're not amazingly bitter. They're so happy and so proud of the changes that they helped make. Every time I see them, and when I became an editor, they were so happy. Not one of them said, oh my God, I could have done that if we'd done this sooner, or anything like that. They were just so happy that it happened. So happy for me, so happy for other women. And to me, that's the definition of a great heart. Somebody who can see progress and rejoice in it when they're not getting the benefits themselves at all. So I always really need to say a word about them everywhere I go. And in sort of conclusion, I would like to point out that right now, over the 20th century, the number of people over 65 has tripled. There are now 2 million people on or reaching 90. 2/3 of them are women. And for the first time in history, we're at a period when great numbers of people, both men and women, but particularly women, are coming of age into their advanced years after careers that were fulfilling and that they loved and that they are prepared to continue, or that they've been prepared by their careers to look into new options in community work and other jobs, moving forward together, men and women, into the future in which everybody is valued for your potential no matter what your age. And I got to see that all happen, and that really knocks me out. That's my story. Thank you so much for listening.
Who were your personal mentors?
My personal mentors, when I was, you know, there were 2 or 3 of them, and they were all older women who had editing jobs that were important functionally, but did not have the prestige or money attached to them that the editor jobs had. And one of them was a woman named Sharon Rosenhaus, who was an editor at the Daily News when I first got my column the first time. And she was wonderful. I mean, she'd go through it. This does not normally happen, by the way. I don't know if any of you know how columns operate, but in most papers, columnists are not touched. They don't even know what we're writing about because they don't want to know, because they really don't want the responsibility of whatever we're going to do. So they're just like, whatever you're doing, go ahead and do it. You know, we'll talk about it later. It's all good. But back then, I mean, I was so new and unequipped that Sharon would go over my column twice, 2, 3 times a week, and talk about it and what would make this sound better or what would make this more attractive and cooler. And that was when I started thinking about trying to write ways that made people not want to throw themselves out the door or the window in the morning when they read the news. And she was just fantastic, and she was so good mentoring me that the editors, cruel to the bottom of their hearts, also put her in charge of fact-checking Jimmy Breslin. And Jimmy, even in his own words, always said, if you make up a quote that makes somebody look good, they're never going to complain, so what the hell? You know, I mean, he was of a different age, and he was working on a series about police misconduct in Queens. And Sharon would take every single fact that he reported, every single quote, every single thing in the piece, and make him tell her how he got it or where he got it. And I cannot tell you how much yelling went on, and I cannot tell you the words that he said because they're 4-letter and they're very terrible, but he just would walk around the office all day long yelling and screaming about Sharon Rosenhaus. So, at the end, Jimmy won a Pulitzer Prize for those stories. And we hadn't gotten many at that point, so it was a huge deal, and everybody's out in the office, you know, celebrating champagne, and it's hard to drag Jimmy to something like that, so they dragged him in finally, and he goes, rah, rah, rah. And they said, okay, give a speech. And he said, this is all due to Sharon Rosenhaus, but I'm not speaking to her. And he walked away. That was it.
Do you think that we're ready to have a woman as our next president?
Will there be a woman as our next president? Are we ready? I just like to put out one really optimistic thing that just tickles me about this entire saga right now is that we have a very busy Democratic primaries, much talked about, coming up, and much competition. And of the 3 top candidates, who are all in their 70s, the only one whose age never gets talked about is Elizabeth Warren's. Because she runs around like a maniac. I mean, she is really like that all the time. She is just a bumblebee of activity. And, you know, people talk about Joe Biden, talk about Bernie Sanders, but they don't talk about Elizabeth Warren, who is 70 years of age. So that's kind of a positive thing in my book. I don't know what's going to happen, and we don't know these people very well yet, but I'm just looking forward to the entire process. I truly, truly, truly am. And there's a lot of good people in this race. I mean, none of them amazingly are perfect, I'm shocked to say, but they've all got great qualities. They would all be better presidents than the one we've got, in my opinion, humbly. So we'll wait and see, but I'm going to enjoy it personally. I can't wait and see what happens next.
As a lifelong reader of the New York Times, one of the things I've always appreciated is that it was direct in its reporting. I felt over the past 3 years that I've seen editorial comments creep in on a very regular basis into what should be straightforward reporting. Could you comment on that?
Yeah, the position is still the strong ethical compass of the Times is that the news section does straight news reporting and tries to be as, well, insists on being accurate and tries to be as even-handed as possible. It's not even just the Donald Trump moment. Ever since the web started becoming a huge thing, it's become more and more and more difficult because web readers are used to reading stuff that just says right up front exactly what the thing is and moves it along much faster than people used to have patience for a lot more leading up to stuff. And that's been one reason that the way things are written is different now. And I know it disturbs some people, but the ethics of it is exactly the same. And the other thing, which is just ungodly, I just can't tell you those poor people downstairs what they go through, but the right wing is very, very critical of the New York Times. But the left wing is also very, very critical of the New York Times because both sides want it to be saying the things that they're thinking and not, somewhere down the middle. And it's the hardest time, I think, probably ever, and maybe back in the 1820s or something it was like this, but it's been in my lifetime certainly never as difficult as it is now for news reporters to simply report the news objectively and move on to the next day. It's just crazy out there, and the people that work down there do, I think, a spectacular job. They all work like maniacs. They all have the highest possible ethics. The folks in opinion, I used to talk about this with Andy Rosenthal, who was my successor. If somebody had come to me any day today and said, we can get, one side of you has to go, if opinion stays, the news side must go, vice versa. I would kill off opinion in 2 seconds. There is nothing more important and valuable to this country right now than to have really great news reporting, and that's what we've got. Thank you. I was rambling a bit on that, but I feel so very, very intense about the amazing work that our colleagues we say downstairs because physically they are from where we are doing. That's just, they're amazing, every single one of them.
Much. I was wondering what your thoughts are as far as the effect of the Me Too movement is on women, older women, younger women.
It's the Me Too movement. My first thought about the Me Too movement is that it's so amazing. The reason this happened right now is because for the first time in human history, there are women working everywhere that men are working. They're all over the place. And men, that hasn't been the history of men. Obviously, great men like the guys who are here today are not going to have any problem with stuff like that, but there are a lot of guys who are, sort of reared to believe that your job is sort of to grab women whenever they come around, and they have to be re-educated. And the Me Too movement is doing an excellent re-education job. Years ago, I covered the Mike Tyson trial. I don't know if you remember that. He was convicted of rape. There was a young girl who was I think she won the Miss Black Teenager contest in Indianapolis, and he was the judge, and he asked her up to his room, which she, being like 17 or so, presumed meant there was going to be a party in his room and that she was going to maybe meet some celebrities. He, of course, being Mike Tyson, thought that she was agreeing to be thrown down on the bed and ravaged, and that's what happened, and then he was convicted and sent away. But the interesting part to me was when I came back, I would hang around sort of at schools and stuff where this was being discussed. And it was so interesting looking at the young guys there and the teachers saying, look, now here's the answer. If she says no, it's really no. You just have to presume it's really no. This was a long time ago, and they were starting even then to send that message down. And of course, most men got it, but a number of them didn't and still haven't to this day. And it's the Me Too movement that's working to settle that up. I think God bless.
Could you address the issue of Facebook and the truth or lack thereof in ads that's been in the news the last few days?
The Facebook ad issue, no, I really can't. I mean, I have so many things, and I just the Facebook ad thing I've decided to leave to other people. It's obviously very important. It's interesting to me that the Mueller report, when it came out, the poor man kept trying over and over again to say, yeah, Donald Trump, but the thing you've got to care about here is that the Russians are going to mess with our elections again and again and again, and we have to figure out all kinds of ways to make sure that can't happen. And that got totally, utterly ignored, and the Attorney General is right now, sort of trying to prosecute people who believe that. It's just, that's the biggest worry to me right now, and I'm sorry I can't be more direct in your question, but I don't even have a Facebook page, I have to tell you. I mean, there's one there for me, but there's a lovely young woman in my office who's my assistant who puts things in it. And I don't tweet. Tweeting, it seems to me, an invitation to disaster of some terrible consequence, so I don't do that either. And yet my days are full. It's amazing,
In light of your answer about how writing has changed at the New York Times and other newspapers for obvious reasons, what do you think about the future of investigative journalism?
It's really, really interesting. I often, wander off and talk to young people about who want careers in journalism, and I tell them about how I got started, which was that I went to, I couldn't get a job. My husband, we came to Connecticut because he got a job at the New Haven Register, and I could not find work anywhere. So I went to all the little papers in the state, and I told them I would cover their state legislator in Hartford for $10 a week. And I got 40 clients, and I got a little business, and it all worked out, and I did it for years. And when I did it, I was writing so many stories, like, 40 a week, 50 a week sometimes, that really the division of my mind between writing and talking just left. I can write as fast as I can talk now, which is probably not good for many reasons, but but it was still a gift. But I try to talk to young people about how they could do stuff to launch their careers, and there aren't 40 papers in Connecticut anymore. There's nowhere near that amount, and there are certainly a lot of websites that are now trying to fill the gaps that are out there, particularly in local news coverage. It used to be every suburban town, every little town had their own little paper, and now, I mean, I just have terror about what state legislators now get away with, because nobody's watching them in some of these states, really, God. And really, when people ask me questions often about some stupid thing, like, why did they used to try to prohibit women from using hair dye? The answer is always state legislators. They just do stuff, But so it's a problem. There are a lot of sites that are trying to rise up to answer all of these questions, but they're all, I would bet, certainly almost all of them, funded by donors. There are none of them that are making any profit. There is not a model yet to make profit from advertising, certainly, on the web, and to make money from circulation. You've got to be like the Times and have 1 million people out there reading your thing. You can't do it in your little town where you're hoping that 2,000 people will someday, subscribe. So it's very worrisome. And what I tell young people is just find places to write. Whatever interests you, whatever floats your boat, just go onto those websites and keep writing and writing and writing and writing and writing. And stuff happens. I speak as a person who once was a correspondent for the Plastics News and Gazette. Wonderful thing, plastics, I can't tell you. But so that's the best I can tell you. It's a very hard time, but they will triumph, I'm sure.
Back to mentoring, are you in a position to tell us about any women that you're mentoring at the moment who we perhaps should also be reading?
Any women that I'm mentoring at the moment, there are a bunch of them at the Times who are incredibly ambitious and incredibly smart and incredibly good writers. It's very, very hard for them to break through to the next level. And what inspires me is that they're going to keep at it. I just know they are. They get one story every 6 months, maybe or maybe a feature story or something. And you can just see from their devotion and their intensity that they're gonna knock people out. and I can't wait to be reading them when it happens. And people like me have to get out of the way at some point so that they have a chance to, expand. But there's just a ton of them out there, and I just love them all.
Your answer to one of the earlier questions was that you were looking forward to what's coming ahead, and I'm dying to know what it is you're looking forward to.
Hey, look at it this way. It cannot really get much worse. Things are going to improve. There is no question about that whatsoever. I'm really looking forward to this election. I'm really looking forward to watching, there's a number of qualified Democrats, and I'm really looking forward to watching them lay into Donald Trump. I'm really looking forward to those debates. I'm looking forward to the national conversation we're going to be having over the next year. It's good. And then, personally, I'm looking forward to doing the next stuff. I'm going to write another book sooner or later. My husband made me promise not until the end of the year anyway, but very soon. And stuff is good. And I just love the Times. Working for the Times is the greatest thing that could happen to anybody in the entire world. And I will never stop being grateful for that.
I wanted to know then what a typical day was like for you in the newsroom. Or is there not a typical day?
There's pretty much not a typical day anymore. Right now, because of the book in part, I'm writing one column a week, and I'm having a conversation with Bret Stephens every other week. We just posted one today, which is wonderful fun. He is just the best person to converse with in the world. I don't know how many of you ever read those things. We're supposed to be arguing. It's very hard to argue with Bret, who hates Donald Trump more than I do. But so what I do is we spend a while, bitching about Donald Trump, and then I'll say, well, what about Elizabeth Warren? And then he goes nuts. So it works out at the end, But so I do different things. Right now I've been on the road for quite a while now. Tomorrow I'm going home, and then I'll go back to. I've got a column that's due on Thursday, and. I'm confessing this to you, the column is entirely written, but my problem is I can't figure out how to transmit it on my laptop. So I'll have to go down and find some helpful people tonight to help me out. Or they can talk me through it. Something will happen. But then, the columnists don't work regular days in the office. We're all kind of in the same little area. We used to have offices, the columnists. It was very cool, a little office and windows and stuff. But when the paper, for economic reasons, squished down and rented out the top floors, so we're now in a pod with everybody else, who's in opinion. And I thought I was really ticked off about that, I got to tell you. I did not want that to happen at all. But I've really gotten into it. It's perfectly fine, and it's nice sort of seeing other people around all the time. The columnists don't come in any particular time, so you never know who's going to be there. When Nick Kristof is in the country, he's usually there. And Frank Bruni, who is my great friend who sits across from me, comes in a couple of times a week. I usually come in 2 or 3 times a week. Bret comes in 2 or 3 times a week, and a lot of the others are in Washington. But people come around and hang out and talk, and then I go home. And my husband, who is retired now, prepares before dinner a list of 20 things he thinks I didn't know happened that day, every day. And he's always right. I never know any of them. So that really knocks me out, And then we have a normal life otherwise. We see friends, we go out, we do stuff. So it's all good.
Hi, I just wondered if you've come to a conclusion yet about the worst cabinet member.
Well, I have to tell you, the votes are in. Boy, we got a lot of votes, I can't tell you. And I cannot tell you until Thursday who it is. I can only tell you that the person who won by a landslide. I was stunned. I had no idea. So anyway, I'll leave you to find out on Thursday what it is. Sorry, can't do it, not yet.
If you talk about older women, what do you hope Nancy Pelosi is going to do next?
What do I hope Nancy Pelosi is going to do next? I think, she should, I can't wait for her to go ahead and impeach the sucker. That's why. She's very canny. I totally underestimated her. I only knew her from when she came by for editorial board meetings and stuff. But she's wow. I mean, she knows what she's doing. I can't wait to see what happens.
Thank you so much. I'm a former journalist and reporter myself years ago, and I'm curious if you have an opinion on the model of support that the Philadelphia Inquirer has right now, where we have a philanthropic base. And on that line, one of my great concerns right now is the closing of the museum in Washington. It just seems to me a tragedy in this day and age.
Yeah, I remember going to the museum many times myself. And as far as the Inquirer goes, I'm not an expert in anything that's going on at that paper, and I would never, ever not say just wonderful things about any paper that is struggling to continue to do local coverage right now. Anything you can do to support and help them, it's God's work. And on that note, go forward, support, and thank you so much for being here. Thank you very, very much.